Hey everyone, Mr. Happy here, and in this video, I wanted to share with you my thoughts on the most recent Savage tier in Final Fantasy XIV, Pandemonium Asphodelos, our first Savage tier in Endwalker. And boy, for those of us who have been playing for a long time, we've been waiting for a new Savage tier for a long time. Now, every time a new Savage tier comes out, people ask me what I think, and well, this is no different. I've done all the fights, I cleared them week one, I've re-cleared them at this point, and I want to talk about them because this was a tier that I thought was pretty exciting. So before covering any of the encounters in particular, just saying that this video is entirely off script, so I might stumble over my words a little bit here or there. Might do a couple retakes, but I just done nothing but write scripts and stuff for the past, I don't know how many days doing all the Savage guides, so I'd rather just sit back, enjoy something, and just kind of talk as like a fan, as like a nerd of all this stuff. And with that, before even talking about the individual fights, I am going to go out on a limb here, and this might be a little bit of recency bias. I think this is one of the best tiers we've had since the creator era of Savage tiers. For those of you who aren't aware, before the creator tier of Alexander, the third tier, Savage was considered a lot more of kind of like an exclusive content. You had to be in that really upper top percentile to even participate in it in the first place. And it was a very unhealthy rating scene that in my opinion, would have single-handedly killed a single aspect of this game had it continued down that path. And this is the antithesis of that, as was Creator. It's 4 very fun fights to prog. In my opinion, they were fun fights to prog, followed by fights that aren't really that annoying to re-clear. You can kind of improve certain things and find out ways to maybe play a little bit better going into the following weeks. But with the way the fights are set up, it's really about uncovering that initial puzzle without a whole lot of hubbub for the re-clears. At least I hope for most people that's the case. I know doesn't always work out that way, but you know, that's the party finder. That's rating for you. It is what it is. So right off the bat, incredibly high praise for the design across this tier, and I'll talk about that with the individual fights as well. So our first fight of Asphodelos, good old Eric Tony, as some of my friends like to call it, Orithonios. This was one that I was fully prepared to be a complete joke. Now, a lot of the times, the normal mode and the savage mode, I mean, they're different. They're always different. But you can usually get a tell for how easy or annoying or difficult that first encounter is going to be based on normal mode, because it's the fight with the lowest difficulty jump. But they really went for a good prog experience with this encounter, because it's not overall that difficult or that engaging of an encounter. It's basically got 3 mechanics, and if you can do those at any given point of the fight, you're okay. Can you do the elemental towers for Intemperance? Can you get into position for red and purple chains? And can you do the Aether Flails with the floor exploding? And that's really just combining phase 1 mechanics with just needing to stand on a particular color. I mean, that's not that big of a deal. But that being said, I think the initial shock of going into that first fight after expecting nothing for 2 weeks from doing normal mode was a pleasant surprise. A lot of the things we predicted, a lot of the things a lot of people predicted, ended up coming to pass with a lot of phases. And then some stuff happened that nobody expected at all. The red and purple chains, while an incredibly simple mechanic to solve and to execute, puts a little bit of pressure on people. The positioning is very specific, and I think that it's a great thing to test for people. I know there's a little bit of discussion about differences in strategies in the first fight, and given the ease of the fight, people wanting to take shortcuts and skip mechanics, or, you know, do tank damage down for Intemperance, or I saw one PF wanted to just kill all 4 of the red tethers during change and just res them, which is insane, because I don't know that you can guarantee nobody gets rezzed, like that it's not just all of your rezzers that get red chained. I don't know if you can guarantee that, but that's just because maybe I don't remember. But and then also timer strat versus YOLO strat. But ultimately, a fight that's flexible is a fight that is normally better designed. And the first fights are normally fairly flexible with strategy, because they want you to come up with a creative solution to something that will kill you if you do it wrong, but is not super strict on how the player has to solve it. It's a very common trend with the first encounter, and it's one they nailed here. And then re-clearing it, super easy. Honestly, the toughest part about re-clearing it was reminding people how we did it the first week, because we spent so little time doing it that people were like, how do I do this fight again? I haven't done it in a week. But either way, I was really impressed with this. This is one of my favorite first fights we've had in a really long time. I don't know that it's the same quality as like the Chaos encounter back in Stormblood, which I think is still one of the best first encounters we've ever had. But even then, it's certainly a good effort. And I got to give them credit where credit's due, because I had no expectation. And it definitely was the proper start to the very first Savage encounter for this raid tier. And if you're afraid of hopping in, don't be. Like I said, it's one of those things where once it was figured out, you just follow a few simple rules and it's fine. It'll definitely make for a lot of people's first good Savage raiding experience. Now, on to the second encounter. I was fully prepared to hate this on Savage, because in normal mode, it is absolute chaos, which is a crazy thing to say about a normal mode. But there is one thing I had kind of forgotten to consider. In normal mode, sometimes mechanics almost seem harder because they're trying to, again, be loose with the rules. You know, they don't want to tell you, oh, you have to spread this way or you wipe, or you have to make this movement or you die. And when Savage comes around, they tend to tighten that up a little bit. And they did that by removing a quarter, like one of the raised platforms on the arena, and forcing you to work within the remaining space. It actually forces there to only be certain ways to solve these mechanics. And because of that, it was one of those fights where it's really interesting to prog. It's really interesting to learn and execute the first time. But on re-execution, it's not all that bad. Once all the rules are settled, you realize that you were maybe afraid of something that you shouldn't have been afraid of the entire time. And I think that's going into these first two fights as a whole is a really healthy design. Something should be fun to prog initially, fun to learn, fun to execute on, and then be kind of a pain after that. You know, when you finally get down to re-clearing, you don't want it to be a pain. You don't want it to be like Ramo or E9S, where people are killing each other with tiles and people can't drop brambles properly and people can't break tethers and people move too early and people move too late. This has that. Like, you can obviously screw up like you can with any other mechanic, but it doesn't. It feels like it's just a matter of getting it memorized more than anything else. And I think that, again, that's a healthy design. This also had just some fun mechanics. It tried not to overuse certain aspects of normal mode, but it also tried to put a few twists on things. A winged cataract, of course, being the reverse, throws people off the first time. Instead of doing the stack on everyone with, it wasn't called predatory avarice in normal mode. It was called something else. But in Savage, you know, you have the melee and the DPS that need to get away, and you have the healer, I'm sorry, the DPS and the tank that need to get away, and the healer that has the stack marker. Consistency, but then forcing you to use the space in a very particular way. Not all too strict, being only the second encounter, but very punishing if you were to do it wrong. I think the flows and the crashes and the way the arena is designed is among the more interesting things. People always complain, you know, oh, this arena is a circle, this arena is a square, and there's very little variety in it. But it's because if they're going to do something different with the arena, they want to make sure it's with a good purpose. And if they had just left a wide open arena for these flows, I mean, you see how it goes in the first part of the fight. You know, the only difference is they probably would have thrown like an AoE that cuts off half the room, or a quarter of the room being cut off, or they would have added some other arbitrary rule. But using the arena both thematically for the boss and as kind of a limited method of being able to solve the mechanics with the space you have left, I think it's just, it's good design. It's healthy design and it's fun design, because when that stuff gets pulled off correctly, when you actually execute on what you can see and what makes sense, it feels good. And I don't know. This fight just turned out a lot better than I thought it was going to. Again, no expectation, but just kind of exceeded that for me. I don't know what else to say. Now, moving on to the third fight, I was always 50-50 on this one, but for a different reason. I actually thought this was going to be good, but I was almost afraid of how it was going to distinguish itself as a good fight. The normal mode very quickly establishes that this is kind of a mishmash of previous third encounters. Turn 12 from the final coils of Bahamut being the second, being the penultimate encounter before Bahamut. And then you had A3S, which is displayed here in Savage mode. And then you have A11S, which was another thing that was very, very prominent. Really old encounters that newer players wouldn't be hyper familiar with unless they went out of their way. And it being a mishmash of all good third bosses made for a good third boss. I mean, who would have expected that, right? They made sure there were a lot of distinguishing factors here, a lot of unique mechanics to Savage. The boss very rarely does anything the same way twice. It has a few missteps. I think the first time that you actually get Fledgling Flight is kind of lame. but then the time you get after it, again, it's not even interesting the second time, but the heal check that comes with that, not to mention Fountain of Fire is a lot of fun for healers. The execution of that is very satisfying to pull off. The add phase is fairly well done. It's not overly complicated. It just adds layers, make sure there's lots of damage, make sure there's a few very specific positionings, and forces you to consider how you'll get through that. Same with the Darkened Fires, which I kind of wish happened more than once. I'm kind of sad they only happen once. The dive bomb changes like we predicted, either going through the middle of the room as spread AoEs or going along the side, although I hadn't predicted there would be stack AoEs, I don't think. I'd have to watch the prediction video again. But it's a constant flow. It's really fast-paced. It's very involved for the tanks, especially if you want to do optimal strategies. I mean, there's tank invuln strats for Storms of Asphodelos. There's positioning the boss between north and the middle to make sure you can do very particular types of positioning. There's a bunch of different strategies going around that are making use of the space in a number of different ways. There's ways to optimize for melee, way to optimize for casters and range, and there's just so much. And it's a little overwhelming when you're first learning it, but once you understand how the fight works, it just all kind of clicks. The whole fight just pulls together, and it's one of the fastest, like, near 11-minute encounters I think I've ever done. The time of that fight just blows by so quick. And because of that, the boss doesn't ever feel like it's overstaying its welcome. Its health drops at a very satisfying rate. Because when a boss feels like it's dying super slow, you kind of sometimes feel discouraged a little bit. Like, oh my goodness, you know, we have a minute left and the boss has 8% and it feels like it's taking forever. But that doesn't happen here because they account for the downtime with the ads, the downtime during the dive bomb phases. I think the mechanics in general, they expect to be very movement heavy. So you constantly feel like you're making really good forward progression for a third encounter. And every time you get to a new landmark mechanic, your Fountain of Fire, your first time in Firestorms, your first time doing Death's Toll, you feel like you've made a giant stride in the encounter. And that's a super satisfying feeling for initial proc, and a super satisfying feeling when you're learning it, like, not even week one. It's just a really good experience to have for an encounter, and one they have failed on so hard in the past, especially with third boss. I don't know what it is. A lot of the times their third bosses just don't turn out good. When they are good, they're fantastic. I think back to Halicarnassus and Stormblood. Last expansion, E11, I wasn't a super big fan of, but it was certainly better than the other two in my opinion. But yeah, they nailed a lot of aspects to it. So I'm really glad that this happened this way, because I am a firm believer that the second and third encounter in a tier essentially define the tier. A first encounter can be good or bad. People are kind of indifferent to it. And the last encounter can be good or bad, and people can be indifferent to it in regards to judging the whole tier. But if the second and third fights suck, that, like, think of it like a sandwich. If the bread is good but the meat sucks, then the sandwich isn't great. Whereas if the bread sucks and the meat is great, you just pull those sides off the end, and at least you still have a decent meal in front of you. I don't know why that analogy works or why it makes sense to me for Savage, but it just does. When the second and third encounter are the good encounters, it makes the whole tier good. And when then you have 4 good encounters, it's fantastic. So I look forward to doing this every week. I look forward to parsing in it, improving in it, trying it on different jobs, healer, tank, whatever, because it just looks like I'm going to be involved no matter what. And I'm going to be having a good time, and I'm going to be participating in all the mechanics, and maybe some mechanics that are role specific or positions that are role specific. So there's a lot to take away from that third encounter. And if they can nail this kind of format going forward, this kind of feeling going forward, then we're going to be having a whole good expansion of tiers. I really dread the first fight that I think is a genuinely bad fight, because I'm going to end up holding it to a worse regard, especially because this fight ended up being so good. And then we come to the final fight, and I'm still kind of considering how I feel about this one, because I've looked back and I've kind of analyzed the timelines. Again, I think they nailed Prague on this fight. It's fast, it's furious. And then I also noticed that this fight gets you kind of nervous. It's almost poetic that they have this kind of Dracula-esque, spooky castle, and there's this dread that's constantly going on in this encounter, because when you're thinking of the next thing that's going to happen, the boss is doing all this setup. He's casting this skill to give you this debuff and setting up this thing that's going to happen later. And you're just constantly thinking about that mechanic that's 15, 20 seconds ahead, because the boss is forcing you to do that. And that gets you kind of on edge when you're in your game-to-game, your moment-to-moment gameplay, because you want to be focusing on that moment, but you really can't. And that gets kind of a unique blood rush going, an adrenaline going, that you don't get with a whole lot of other encounters. Some, but definitely not all of them. And the fact that the boss really has, I would say, 3 major mechanics, and one of them kind of repeats in a not a less stressful manner, but in a slightly different manner that maybe comes off as a little less stressful in the form of Blood Rakes 4 and 5. It just kind of works out. Again, it's a very quick, just, about 7.5, just under 7.5 minutes that again just really gets the blood going. I think they could have been more creative with the door boss. Not that they didn't do a good job with the creativity, but a lot of things we were sort of right about, Pinax in particular, as well as the cape and sword mechanics. They just did the same thing as normal mode, but did it a lot faster, and it deals a lot more damage. But fortunately, the actual balancing of the healing and of the damage you need to deal versus the damage you take, I think, is spot on. It is not a quick and easy healer fight where they can just do a ton of DPS. There is a lot of healing from this mechanic, from that mechanic, from the blood rakes, from the room-wide AoEs, from the knockback, from the cape, from the spreads, from the stacks, from the towers, from the tethers, from everything. And there's just this constant flow of damage that's coming in for the healers to deal with, that when they do get a break, it's to give them time to get resources back so that they can dump them on the next mechanic. And that just, again, I like to see healers being forced to heal. I know healers maybe sometimes just want to be able to deal DPS, but when I see a healer being forced to heal and I see mechanics that are just trying to be back to back to back, mitigate this, heal that, shield this, for me, I am more invested. It makes me more interested in wanting to play tank or healer, because I feel like I'm being put into a role that I kind of signed up for in the first place. So I'll try to get the damage out. The goal will be to optimize the damage as much as possible, but I have to make concessions there to make sure that my team is safe. And that the more I have to do that, the more I genuinely feel like I'm having a good time in that role. That's why I don't mind doing Party Finder on healer, because they make me work double time no matter what. So I get to feel like I'm a healer plenty in the Party Finder. Trust me. This first encounter nails all those aspects. It is a door boss, and I'm still 50-50 on the way they do door bosses nowadays, where they do like one 7.5 minute encounter and one like 8 to 9 minute encounter, because it kind of, I think, undervalues the second encounter every time when that's the kind of timeline you're working with. I still think Exdeath into Neo Exdeath is the best door boss they've ever done, where he's about 4 to 4.5 minutes, and then his actual form is about 12 minutes. So I think that of the use of about 16 minutes, which is usually the approximate combined length of the of all of that, I think that's the healthy way to do things. And this, I like both of these bosses. They're a lot of fun, great to figure out, great to execute. But I definitely lose a bit of excitement compared to thinking back to Exdeath, Neo Exdeath, which again I think is the pinnacle of door boss design. Speaking of which, taking away from the second encounter, I like that they really stuck to a theme on this second encounter. It's something that they don't normally, I guess, dive all the way into one mechanic being the entire encounter. And they really went with that here, and it works, very surprisingly. Every single mechanic is a bunch of thorns are placed on the ground to conceal a mechanic. You have to look at the order he tethers to them, remember what they do, and then execute a specific dance. It's all a matter of standing in towers to make sure they don't explode on the raid, and giant AoEs that cover like a half of the room, or, breaking a tether and an explosion happens. And it's literally every component of the fight makes sense right from the get-go, and the rules it teaches you instantly help you uncover how to do the rest of the fight. It is such a healthy design that despite the visual clutter, the clarity of what you're supposed to do is staggeringly well done. I can't believe, with all the colors and tethers and thorns and explosions and doing your DPS and moving the boss, and that they somehow gave it a visual clarity that would normally be considered an absolute disaster with stuff. And I don't know how you do better than that from there. If I can see it with my messed up vision, then honestly, I think it can only go down. I think this is the plateau of just massive amounts of spell effects on the screen, but still being able to clearly decipher what needs to happen, what has happened, what went wrong, etc., etc. So, wow. Yeah, the more I talk about it, the more impressed I am with this. And it's just a genuinely fun encounter. It's really, really fast. So again, that feeling of progression feels strong. The one advantage to having a short second boss after a long door boss is that every time you make it through a mechanic, you've made it through a massive portion of the encounter. It's a huge milestone that you should be pleased that you've managed to overcome. And, you know, you do get that with other ones, but it doesn't always function. It just doesn't always come together as well as you want it to. Sorry, an S rank spawned in the middle of my recording, so I had to go defeat it. Listen, I told you this was unscripted, so sometimes things happen. Yeah, overall, this is the best way Endwalker could have started after such a long time of not having a Savage tier, of just needing to do E9 through 12, going back and doing Ukab, Uwu, T. Like, yeah, I like those encounters, but I want to see what's next. I want to see what the development team has learned. I want to see what they're trying that's new. And I couldn't have asked for a better display of a direction going forward when it comes to Savage. I honestly think the next tier is going to be worse because I think they just started too good. I can't hold them to the expectation the next tier will be better because they made something I just didn't expect. A whole tier I enjoy. I can't remember the last time this happened. Gates is probably the closest thing that's come to that. So I know some people are going to disagree with me about these fights. There's definitely people that don't like the second fight. There's definitely people that don't like the third fight. And I'm sure there are people who don't like the first or fourth fights. They either think they're boring, or they think they're too chaotic, or they think hitting the boss is too difficult or something. But as more mechanics are figured out and dialed down to such a potency that even the simplest of things can be done in order to completely combat some of the tedium of boss pulling and positioning and stuff, I think it's going to happen. I've already seen some stuff popping up out there, and I think that we're all going to have a good time. I think it's going to be a good next few months of Party Finder, a good next few months of weekly clears, and I'm looking forward to getting in there and trying it with a few other jobs on some 0-1 chests, for sure. With that, my rambling ons can be done rambling on. Whatever. Thank you for watching this video. Be sure to like, favorite, subscribe, and share. And stay tuned. I got some old videos that I didn't get to catch up on. We've, of course, got all the news. Anything you need to know about 14 will be here. And we've got some other fun things coming down the pipeline as well. Anyway, I'll see you in the next video. And until then, take care.